They say Hollywood's brightest lights cast the darkest shadows. For every glitzy premiere, there was a secret the studios would do anything to erase. But how far did the moguls really go to protect their legends? And what truths vanished behind those iron gates? From mysterious cover-ups to careers shattered in silence, the stories you know are just the tip of the iceberg. Stay tuned, because some secrets never made the credits, but their echoes still haunt the reels of old Hollywood. Arranged lavender marriages to hide stars' sexuality. Hollywood sold fairy tales, not just on the screen, but in the glossy lives of its biggest stars. Audiences bought tickets to see Clark Gable sweep Vivien Leigh off her feet, and they wanted to believe the actors' real lives were just as romantic, just as traditional. But the truth? Some of those marriages were as scripted as the films themselves. Studios orchestrated lavender marriages, fake unions designed to hide an actor's homosexuality or protect a starlet's reputation. Behind closed doors, the truth was buried deeper than the sets on the backlot. Rock Hudson is the classic example. Universal Pictures micromanaged his image down to the last detail. When rumors about his relationships with men started to swirl, the studio arranged for him to marry Phyllis Gates, his agent's secretary. The press got wedding photos. The real Rock Hudson got to keep his secret, at least for a while. And he wasn't alone. Barbara Stanwyck and Robert Taylor, Cary Grant and Randolph Scott. These names were linked to relationships or marriages that deflected questions and killed rumors. Sometimes, the couples barely lived together. Sometimes, they were close friends, covering for each other. Studio contracts demanded strict moral clauses, and the cost of being outed wasn't just a lost job. It was social exile. Why did the studios go to such lengths? Because, in the 1940s and 50s, being outed as gay or bisexual wasn't just scandalous. It could mean arrest, blacklisting, or even institutionalization. The family values image the studios sold had to be unbreakable. As a result, generations of stars lived double lives, enduring heartbreak, secrecy, and relentless pressure to fit a narrative that was never their own. The tabloids never printed those stories, but everyone in the industry knew the truth. In old Hollywood, love was sometimes just a contract, and authenticity was the one thing never allowed in the spotlight. Forced abortions for contract actresses. The most harrowing secrets of old Hollywood didn't happen on set. They happened in the offices where powerful men decided what a star's life should look like. The studios had a brutal, hands-on approach to anything that threatened the purity or marketability of their leading ladies. Unplanned pregnancy? There was no room for it. Not in a starlet's contract. Not in a studio's PR plan. Young actresses like Judy Garland, Jean Harlow, and countless others were pushed, coerced, or outright forced into abortions, often at the hands of studio-approved doctors or in seedy back-alley clinics. It started early. Judy Garland, still a teenager, and MGM's prized property, faced a regimen of pills, caffeine, and strict weight checks. But when she became pregnant by bandleader David Rose, the studio ordered her to take care of it. The exact same fate met by others whose careers would be ruined by motherhood. Studio heads justified it as protecting the investment. The reality was far darker. Some actresses were sent to sanatoriums for months, with cover stories about nervous exhaustion. Others simply vanished from film schedules, only to reappear after recovering from a mystery illness. No one asked if they wanted to keep the child. No one cared about the trauma, the pain, or the aftermath. The press never got wind. Studio fixers paid off hospital staff, falsified records, and threatened anyone who spoke out. Hollywood sold the public a story of perfect, chaste glamour, while young women paid the ultimate price for their stardom and silence. For the actresses themselves, it was a lifelong wound. Some, like Jean Harlow, never spoke of it. Others, like Judy Garland, wore scars for the rest of their days. In the end, the studio's obsession with perfection erased not just scandals, but real, human lives, and those secrets stayed hidden long after the lights went down. Prescription drug addiction, fueled by studio doctors. If you think prescription drug abuse is a modern Hollywood epidemic, take a closer look at the studio era, where addiction wasn't just common, it was company policy. Behind the silver screens and bright lights, young stars were handed pills as casually as they were handed contracts. The drive for perfection, endless energy, flawless beauty, and unbreakable stamina meant studios leaned on studio doctors to keep their moneymakers in working order, no matter the personal cost. Judy Garland is the poster child for this horror, but she wasn't the only one. Mickey Rooney, a household name by the age of 13, was force-fed uppers to get him through marathon shooting schedules, then handed downers at night to knock him out. Studio doctors were complicit, sometimes visiting sets with entire satchels of pills, amphetamines for weight loss and wakefulness, barbiturates for sleep, and tranquilizers for anxiety. The actors, many just teens, were barely told what they were taking, only that it was doctor's orders. The routine was relentless. Early call times? Pop a pep pill. Weight not melting off fast enough? Add another diet tablet to the regimen. Not sleeping because of nerves? Down a sedative. The cycle was vicious. Stars lost track of reality, and more than a few developed lifelong dependencies. Garland, by her 20s, was hopelessly addicted and emotionally frayed. Others, like Marilyn Monroe and Elizabeth Taylor, would also struggle with the devastating side effects of drugs that had been handed out like candy. Why did the studios do this? Because if a star faltered, production halted. If an actress gained a few pounds, her next role could be in jeopardy. Doctors on payroll signed off on anything the studio needed, and complaints were ignored or crushed. In the end, countless icons were left struggling with broken health and shattered minds, all so the cameras could keep rolling and the illusion of perfection could continue. It's a legacy of exploitation that the studios have tried to erase, but the aftershocks are still felt in Hollywood to this day. Blacklisting and career destruction during the Red Scare. One of the darkest chapters in Hollywood's history unfolded not on screen, but in congressional hearing rooms and secret studio back offices. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, set its sights on rooting out communist subversives in the film industry. But what began as an anti-communist crusade quickly devolved into an all-out witch hunt. For actors, directors, and writers, one wrong move, one unpopular opinion, one refusal to testify, or one accusation from a colleague meant instant professional death. Take Larry Parks, a talented actor whose career was on a meteoric rise after The Jolson Story. Summoned before HUAC, Parks pleaded not to be forced to name names, but under brutal pressure he did, and was blacklisted anyway. Studios dropped him overnight. Once hailed as a future star, Parks was suddenly radioactive. The blacklist was a weapon wielded by studios not just against suspected communists, but anyone they found inconvenient or troublesome. Dalton Trumbo, one of Hollywood's top screenwriters, spent years writing Oscar-winning scripts under fake names because no studio would hire him openly. Many, like John Garfield, saw their health collapse under the stress. The blacklist wasn't just about politics. It was about control. Studios and powerful insiders used it to keep talent in line and silence dissenters. Some stars managed to rebuild their lives, but many never worked in Hollywood again. The official line, repeated for decades, was that these measures protected America. The truth was much grimmer. Careers were destroyed, lives were upended, and a culture of fear and silence took root in an industry built on self-expression. Today, the era is remembered as a shameful lesson in paranoia and power. But for many, the pain and lost potential were never fully erased, no matter how hard the studios tried to rewrite history. Studio-engineered lovechild cover-ups. In the world of old Hollywood, There was one sin the studios feared more than bad box office: a starlet getting pregnant out of wedlock. For decades, the studios operated as moral overlords, determined to preserve the image of their contract actresses as pure, untouchable, and impossibly glamorous. When reality intruded, when an actress found herself expecting, the solution was not compassion, but cold-blooded cover-up. Loretta Young's story is one of the most infamous. She had a secret affair with Clark Gable while filming Call of the Wild, and the result was a pregnancy she was forced to hide. Disappearing from public view, Young adopted her own biological daughter months after giving birth, with the studio orchestrating the story to fool the public and the press. This wasn't a one-time incident. Jean Harlow, Joan Crawford, and even Ingrid Bergman were forced into similar charades. Some pressured into secret adoptions, others hurried into marriages of convenience, or sent overseas until the scandal could be managed. Studio fixers handled everything, paying off hospital staff, falsifying birth certificates, and crafting elaborate alibis. If a young actress refused to comply, she risked losing her career entirely. Even as the actresses themselves struggled with guilt and heartbreak, their public personas remained flawless, manufactured, maintained, and mercilessly policed. These stories didn't come out until decades later, usually long after the key players were gone and the studio's iron grip had weakened. But for the stars who lived them, the wounds were real and deep. Behind the manufactured smiles on magazine covers, many women grieved for children they could never claim, or for the years spent living a lie. The public saw fairy tale endings. The real endings were written in secrecy, shame, and studio manipulation. In Hollywood, the truth wasn't just hidden, it was erased, buried under decades of spin and silence. Mob ties and organized crime influence. Beneath the bright lights of Hollywood's golden age, the real power sometimes came not from the studios, but from the underworld. While the public adored the glitz, a darker reality lurked in the smoky back rooms of clubs and restaurants. The studios, especially in the 1930s through the 1950s, were tangled up with organized crime in ways most fans never suspected, and every effort was made to keep that truth out of the headlines. Mobsters bankrolled movies, leaned on producers, and even settled disputes between rival stars or labor unions when things got messy. Frank Sinatra's name is inseparable from these whispers. His friendships with mob bosses, like Sam Giancana and the Fischetti brothers, were so notorious that the FBI kept a file on him for decades, tracking his movements, phone calls, and even the gifts he received from underworld figures. But it wasn't just Sinatra. Other stars, George Raft, Bugsy Siegel, even studio heads, mingled with criminals at the Coconut Grove or the Brown Derby, where business and crime went hand in hand. Some of these relationships were about protection, mobsters offering security services for a cut of the profits. Other times, they were about blackmail, gambling debts, or influence over union strikes. Why did the studios tolerate this? Because at times, they had no choice. The mob controlled projectionist unions, labor forces, and even distribution routes for films. Cross the wrong people, and your movie might never see the inside of a theater. When scandals threatened to break, fixers, like Eddie Mannix, called in favors, while the police looked the other way thanks to generous studio donations. To the outside world, Hollywood was all tuxedos and champagne. Behind the scenes, it was a chessboard, and the mob held many of the pieces. To this day, many details remain shrouded in secrecy, with the official histories carefully airbrushed to hide the fingerprints of organized crime, exploitation, and abuse of child actors. For every heartwarming tale of child stars winning over America, there are countless stories the studios desperately tried to bury, stories of exploitation, exhaustion, and emotional trauma that haunted these young performers for life. The Golden Age studios had a simple formula: cute, talented children meant big box office returns. But the reality behind the scenes was often a nightmare. Studios worked child actors like Shirley Temple, Judy Garland, and Jackie Coogan to the bone, sometimes for 12 to 16 hours a day, often with little rest or real schooling. Jackie Coogan's fate is a cautionary tale. After earning millions as a child star, he discovered his mother and stepfather had spent nearly all his money by the time he reached adulthood. The Coogan Law was eventually passed to protect future child actors, but only after Jackie had been financially ruined. Judy Garland's story is even darker. MGM handed her pills to wake up, pills to sleep, and subjected her to brutal criticism about her looks, weight, and even the shape of her nose. The pressure was relentless, the demands endless, and the adults responsible either turned a blind eye or were complicit in the abuse. Studios wrote strict contracts forbidding bad behavior, but those rules only protected the bottom line, not the children themselves. When kids broke down on set, fixers stepped in, quietly sending them off to rest homes or feeding the press tales of nervous exhaustion. In public, the studios celebrated their young stars with carefully orchestrated PR. In private, they denied them any semblance of a normal childhood. For every smiling photo, there were tears the world never saw. The legacy of that exploitation lingers today, a testament to the industry's willingness to sacrifice innocence for profit and to erase every trace of the cost. Race discrimination and passing. Hollywood's classic films might sparkle in black and white, but the industry's history of race discrimination is a stain studios tried desperately to erase. In an era obsessed with image, actors of color were relegated to stereotypes, denied leading roles, or forced to pass as white to have any hope of success. The stories of these performers, often erased or rewritten, are some of the most painful chapters in Hollywood's hidden history. Take Anna May Wong, the first Chinese-American movie star. She was routinely denied meaningful roles in favor of white actresses in yellowface, and when she did get work, it was as a servant, a temptress, or a doomed lover. Louise Beavers and Hattie McDaniel, two black actresses of tremendous talent, were typecast as maids or nannies, no matter how acclaimed their performances. For some, the only way forward was to hide their true heritage. Merle Oberon, a luminous star of the 1930s and 40s, went to extraordinary lengths to conceal her mixed-race background, with studios crafting cover stories about her origins and keeping her away from probing journalists. Studio bosses enforced the color line in casting, contracts, and even off-screen publicity. Couples of different races were forbidden to appear together publicly. Scripts that depicted interracial relationships were heavily censored or banned altogether. Those who tried to speak out, like Paul Robeson or Lena Horne, found themselves blacklisted or pushed to the margins of the industry. Even as Hollywood marketed itself as progressive and glamorous, its doors were firmly shut to anyone who didn't fit a carefully policed image of American beauty. The result was a generation of lost opportunities and hidden identities. Some stars spent their entire careers denying their heritage just to survive. Others vanished from the screen, their stories erased by an industry that prized appearance over truth. The legacy of that discrimination is still being reckoned with today, but for decades, the studios worked tirelessly to make sure the ugly reality never tarnished the shine of old Hollywood. Mysterious, on-set deaths and accidents. Behind the curtain of Hollywood's grand productions, not every tragedy made its way into the newspapers, especially if a studio's reputation was at stake. From suspicious deaths to so-called accidents, the studios moved quickly to control the narrative, often rewriting history before the truth could surface. The case of Thelma Todd is one of the most chilling. Todd, a comedic actress with a promising future, was found dead in her car inside a garage in 1935. The official verdict was carbon monoxide poisoning, but whispers of foul play, mob involvement, and a love triangle plagued the story for decades. The studio's response? Tight-lipped statements, selective leaks, and swift pressure on police and reporters to drop any unflattering theories. But Todd was not alone. In the heyday of the studio system, on-set accidents were common, sometimes the result of negligence, other times of outright recklessness or hidden vendettas. Stuntmen died performing dangerous feats, extras were injured in crowd scenes, and actors themselves were sometimes caught in the crossfire of poorly supervised shoots. Yet the public heard little or nothing about these incidents. Studios would hush up the details, compensate families under the table, and rely on friendly connections with the local police to keep the spotlight off any criminal or negligent behavior. When rumors did escape, they were drowned out by positive press campaigns and authorized biographies that painted the studio as caring and responsible. Even in cases where evidence pointed to deeper problems, unsafe sets, rivalries that turned violent, or unsolved murders, the official story was one of misfortune, never malice or neglect. This careful management of the truth wasn't just about saving face. It was about protecting the bottom line. Each incident risked a lawsuit, a public relations disaster, or worse, a box office flop. In the end, many of these tragedies were quietly erased from the historical record, their victims remembered only in whispers and the occasional unsanctioned exposé, studio-run gossip columns, and smear campaigns. In the age before social media, the studios controlled not only the films, but the entire narrative surrounding their stars, and their greatest weapon was the Hollywood gossip columnist. Names like Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons carried more weight than some studio heads, and with a single column, they could make or break a career. But what most people didn't realize was that these columnists were often on the studio's payroll, fed tidbits of information, or outright lies, to distract from real scandals, destroy rivals, or settle personal scores. If a star threatened to break contract, come out with a tell-all, or simply become too powerful, the studio would leak damaging stories, sometimes true, often exaggerated or invented. A headline about a nervous breakdown, an affair, or unprofessional behavior could sink public favor overnight. Studio fixers fed juicy details to the columnists, who, in turn, were rewarded with exclusive interviews, access to stars, or invitations to glittering parties. For ambitious reporters, the price of access was loyalty and silence about the studio's real secrets. Sometimes the gossip was used to steer attention away from more damaging news. If an arrest, pregnancy, or criminal investigation threatened a major star, a rival's scandal would suddenly explode across the headlines, saturating the press and burying the original story. Stars caught in the crosshairs had little recourse. Denial often made things worse, and suing the studios was a death sentence for any career. The real tragedy is that some stars spent their entire careers fighting reputations built on studio-invented lies. Relationships were ruined, mental health suffered, and public trust was shattered, all in service of the industry's relentless spin. The public devoured the drama, never suspecting that much of what they read was engineered in boardrooms, not bedrooms. In old Hollywood, the most successful fiction was often the one written off-screen, and the studios made sure those secrets stayed buried. Hollywood's golden age didn't just create stars, it mastered the art of burying the truth. Every legend was protected by a fortress of secrets, fixers, and carefully crafted lies. Some scandals faded, but the shadows they cast never disappeared. We remember the glamour, but those erased stories shaped destinies, destroyed lives, and left scars behind the spotlight. In the end, the movies kept rolling, and the world kept watching, never realizing just how much history was scripted to remain unseen. The fixers, who cleaned up crime scenes and scandals. When people talk about Hollywood's golden age, they paint a picture of stars shimmering under spotlights, their lives untouched by the grime of the real world. But every studio lot had shadows, and moving in those shadows were the so-called fixers. Eddie Mannix, and Howard Strickling at MGM are the names most people don't know, but every insider did. Their jobs? To protect the image of the studio and its stars at any cost. That meant bribes, threats, falsified police reports, and sometimes cleaning up actual crime scenes before the public or police could see the real story. A drunk driving accident involving a famous starlet? That's nothing a little cash and a swapped driver couldn't fix. A leading man caught in a compromising situation, maybe in a gay bar, maybe with someone's wife? The fixers swooped in, silenced witnesses, destroyed evidence, and handed the police a sanitized version of the truth. Rumors swirled that Eddie Mannix himself arranged for certain studio problems to disappear permanently. Most of these stories never made headlines, but a few did. Jean Harlow's husband, Paul Byrne, was found dead in their home, and within hours, Mannix and Strickling had sanitized the crime scene, leaving police baffled and the press with nothing but questions. Why did these men have so much power? Because the studios were kingmakers, and their stars were investments worth millions. A scandal meant a ruined box office, and that couldn't be allowed. Over time, these fixers became legends, ghostly figures moving behind the scenes, erasing the messes left behind by Hollywood royalty. The public saw perfect smiles, not the panic in the back offices. Today, we talk about PR teams and lawyers. Hollywood's golden age didn't just create stars, it mastered the art of burying the truth. Every legend was protected by a fortress of secrets, fixers, and carefully crafted lies. Some scandals faded, but the shadows they cast never disappeared. We remember the glamour, but those erased stories shaped destinies, destroyed lives, and left scars behind the spotlight. In the end, the movies kept rolling, and the world kept watching, never realizing just how much history was scripted to remain unseen.